Buck Martinez had faced many uncomfortable situations in his career as sheriff, but none quite matched riding into an Apache camp in the middle of the night to ask for help fighting purple space scorpions. His horse seemed to share his unease, dancing nervously as they approached the settlement's outskirts. Before he could even announce himself, a voice called out from the darkness. "We wondered how long it would take you to come, Sheriff Martinez." Chief Running Cloud stepped into the light of a nearby fire, and Buck noticed something that made him pause. The Apache leader was trying very hard not to smile. You know about our visitors?" Buck asked, dismounting. "Know about them?" Running Cloud gestured to his right, where an elaborate brass telescope sat mounted on a tripod. "We have been watching the entire entertainment. Your deputy Jim Bob is very persistent with his tobacco." As if to illustrate the point, several young warriors nearby were engaged in what Buck recognized as a startlingly accurate impression of Jim Bob's tobacco-spitting demonstration, complete with exaggerated gestures and an imaginary hat vaporization. That's a mighty fine telescope you have there," Buck managed, trying to maintain his dignity. "Yes, we traded for it last summer. The merchant called it sacred technology. We did not tell him we knew it was just a very good telescope." This time Running Cloud didn't bother hiding his smile. "Would you like to see your deputy's latest attempts at fighting the star scorpions?" Buck was led to the telescope, where he watched in horror as One-Eyed Pete attempted to organize a cavalry charge using the town's collection of retired circus ponies. Even from this distance, he could see it wasn't going well. One space peon had apparently become fascinated by the trained bear, which was now riding a horse in circles while juggling what looked suspiciously like pieces of jerky. "Your men are brave," Running Cloud offered diplomatically, "if perhaps not entirely wise." "Chief Running Cloud," Buck said, forcing himself to look away from the disaster unfolding in his town, "I've come to ask for our help." The chief nodded. "We have been preparing since the starship landed. My warriors have noticed several interesting things about our purple visitors." Buck followed Running Cloud to a larger fire where a group of Apache warriors sat in a circle. He recognized young Hawk, one of their best scouts, who was drawing something in the dirt with a stick. "Show him what you have observed," Running Cloud instructed. Young Hawk nodded and began pointing to different areas of his dirt map. "The star scorpions avoid certain territories. Here, where the skunks den. Here, where the sun reflects off the white rocks. And here, where Jim Bob spilled his entire winter supply of tobacco last month," Buck finished, remembering the incident. The ground was still stained. "Yes," young Hawk confirmed. "They detect these areas from a distance and change their path. And there is something else. The meat they collect, they are very specific about how they prepare it." Another warrior spoke up. "They adjust their weapons carefully before each shot. The meat must be dried in a particular way. When One-Eyed Pete's horse kicked a mud clod into their ship, they spent much time cleaning every piece of jerky." Buck rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So they're particular about their food. And they don't like strong smells or bright lights." "Or Jim Bob's tobacco," added a younger warrior, triggering another round of impressions that Buck had to admit were getting more accurate by the minute. Running Cloud held up his hand, and the warriors fell silent. "We have also observed their metal skin grows hot in the sun. They release steam like a tired horse. Their eyes do not adjust well to sudden changes in light. That's why they're most active at night," Buck mused. "But they'll need to work during the day too if they want to get all the cattle in the territory." "Precisely." Running Cloud sat down and gestured for Buck to join him. "Now, Sheriff Martinez, tell us what your people have learned. Together, perhaps we can find a way to convince our visitors to seek their dried meat elsewhere." For the next hour, Cowboys and Apache shared observations, each side carefully navigating years of mistrust to piece together a plan. Buck had to admit, it was probably the most civil conversation the two groups had ever had, united by their mutual desire to rid the territory of beef jerky-obsessed aliens. "Your ropes," young Hawk said, holding up one of the Cowboys' lassos, "they are strong enough to hold the star scorpions?" "Strong enough to hold them, yeah," Buck confirmed. "Problem is keeping them held. They're stronger than any 3 steers put together. But if we only need to hold them for a moment." Young Hawk exchanged a look with Running Cloud, who nodded thoughtfully. "And your mirrors?" Buck asked. "I noticed they seem mighty uncomfortable when you caught them with that reflected sunlight." "The sacred mirrors of our ancestors," Running Cloud said with perfect seriousness, before adding with a slight twinkle in his eye, "which we also traded for last summer. Very good for signaling. And, perhaps, for confusing those who are not used to our bright sun." The planning session was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of camp. Two warriors were returning from a scouting mission, and judging by their expressions and the way everyone was giving them a wide berth, their reconnaissance had yielded some pungent results. "Ah," said Running Cloud. "It seems our young warriors have confirmed another weakness of our visitors." He turned to Buck. "Tell me, Sheriff, how do you feel about skunks?" Buck thought about the Space Pion's reaction to Jim Bob's tobacco. "You mean to tell me?" "We observed a small group of the Star Scorpions encounter a skunk family," one of the returning scouts reported, still keeping his distance from the main group. "They retreated most energetically. Ran away like startled children," the other scout added with a grin. "Their metal skin could not stop the smell. They were making sounds like angry crickets." A plan began to form in Buck's mind. It was ridiculous, dangerous, and would require both groups to work together in ways they never had before. In other words, it was perfect. "Chief Running Cloud," Buck said slowly, "how many skunks would you reckon live in this territory?" "More than we would like," Running Cloud replied. "Especially near the old Miller farm. And your warriors? They're skilled at handling such creatures." "We are skilled at many things, Sheriff Martinez. Though I must admit, this would be the first time we have gone to war alongside skunks." The chief stood and addressed his warriors. "My brothers, the Cowboys have finally admitted they need our help." This earned a few good-natured chuckles. "And while they may be fool-headed at times, like Jim Bob with his tobacco," someone called out, triggering another round of impressions. "Yes, like Jim Bob with his tobacco," Running Cloud agreed. "But they are also brave in their own way. And now we face an enemy that threatens all our lands. So I ask you, will we help these Cowboys rid our territory of the Star Scorpions?" The warriors responded with enthusiastic whoops and calls, though the two scouts who'd had the skunk encounter looked slightly less enthusiastic about the developing plan. "Besides," Running Cloud added with a sly smile, "think of the stories we will tell around our fires. The great battle where Apache and Cowboys joined forces to defeat the Star People with skunks." Buck stood and extended his hand to Running Cloud. "Reckon this'll make for quite a tale, assuming we survive." "If we do not survive," Running Cloud said, clasping Buck's hand, "at least we will make the Star Scorpions regret ever developing a taste for our cattle." As if to punctuate their newly formed alliance, a distant flash of green light illuminated the night sky, followed by what sounded suspiciously like Jim Bob trying to explain the finer points of tobacco fermentation to an increasingly irritated audience of space pions. "We should hurry," Buck suggested. "Yes," Running Cloud agreed. "Before your deputy convinces our visitors to destroy the entire territory just to make him stop talking about tobacco." And so, under the light of the stars that had brought them their unusual purple enemies, Cowboys and Apache began planning what would surely be the strangest battle the West had ever seen. They had lassos and mirrors, wisdom and wit, and soon they would have skunks. The space pions wouldn't know what hit them. The next morning dawned on what had to be the strangest war council the West had ever seen. Apache warriors and cowboys huddled around a makeshift map drawn in the dirt, while nearby, what looked like a medieval siege engine was taking shape from old wagon parts and mining equipment. And everywhere, there was the unmistakable evidence of their secret weapon, the pungent aroma of skunk. "Now run this by me one more time," Buck said, watching as One-Eyed Pete and Young Hawk argued about the optimal trajectory for launching their malodorous ammunition. "How exactly are we capturing these skunks?" Running Cloud gestured to where several warriors were constructing elaborate wooden traps. "We have considerable experience in this matter. Last summer, a family of skunks made their home in our sacred cave. The techniques we developed then will serve us well now. Wouldn't it be easier to just shoot them?" Old Man Wilson asked, still bitter about his jerky-fied cattle. The look Running Cloud gave him could have dried up a river. "Please, demonstrate for us how to shoot a skunk without complications." Wilson opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded grudgingly. "Fair point. Meanwhile, Jim Bob had set up what he called his strategic tobacco testing station nearby, convinced that there had to be some combination of leaves that would appeal to their alien visitors. He'd arranged his entire collection, 23 varieties of chewing tobacco, 11 types of pipe tobacco, and what he claimed was a mysterious oriental blend that smelled suspiciously like regular tobacco mixed with sage. Maybe if we mix the tobacco with the skunk spray, he mused, earning alarmed looks from everyone within earshot. Hear me out. We could call it Frontier Force Field, or Purple Scorpion Punch, or... Jim Bob, Buck interrupted, if you mix tobacco with skunk spray, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your days guarding the territory's most remote outhouse. The tobacco enthusiast looked hurt. I'm just trying to contribute to the cause, Sheriff. Young Hawk, who had been watching this exchange with interest, approached Jim Bob. Perhaps your tobacco knowledge could be useful in another way. Tell me, which blend produces the thickest smoke? Jim Bob's face lit up like a sunset. Well now, that'd be my special triple-fermented Kentucky Dark. Won first prize at the state fair for most visible spitting distance. On account of being able to see the trajectory so clear, you understand. Interesting, young Hawk said, shooting a meaningful look at Running Cloud. And how much of this tobacco do you have? While Jim Bob excitedly explained his tobacco reserves, One-Eyed Pete had taken charge of the catapult construction. Despite having depth perception issues that made him the worst shot in the territory, Pete had a surprising talent for engineering. The contraption he was building looked like something out of a fever dream, part mining cart, part windmill, and part cotton gin, all held together with enough rope to tie up every steer from Texas to Montana. The trick, Pete explained to a group of increasingly concerned onlookers, is in the counterweight system. See, we need enough force to launch our little friends over them alien force fields, but not so much that we, turn them into skunk rain. Kid Thompson, who had finally managed to get all the cats out of his hair, was testing different containers to hold their aromatic ammunition. He'd already gone through wooden boxes, too splintery, metal buckets, too noisy, and woven baskets, too porous, as his newly scented poncho could attest. What about these? He called out, holding up some empty grain sacks. They're light, they're flexible, and they're... He sniffed the bag experimentally. Well, they can't smell any worse than they already do. The testing and preparation continued throughout the morning, punctuated by occasional green flashes from town as the space pions continued their systematic jerkification of the territory's livestock. The aliens had developed a more organized approach, working in teams of 3, one to handle the cattle, one to operate the jerky ray, and one to assess the quality of the final product. Running Cloud watched their methodical work through his telescope. They are very particular about their meat preparation. See how they adjust their weapons for each animal. Different settings for different cuts, I believe. That's my prized Hereford they're working on now, Wilson growled. Been fattening him up all winter for the spring market. And now he will be part of an interstellar beef jerky collection, Running Cloud said solemnly, though Buck caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps you should feel honored. The morning's preparations were interrupted by a series of increasingly urgent yelps, followed by the unmistakable aroma of success. 3 Apache warriors came trotting back to camp, carrying between them a secured trap with their first captured skunk. The traps work, one announced unnecessarily, as everyone within 50 feet was already backing away. Though perhaps too well. The skunk, apparently unsure whether to be angry or confused about its situation, had decided to cover all bases by expressing its displeasure thoroughly and frequently. The warriors carefully transferred it to one of Kid Thompson's testing containers, a process that added several new scents to their already fragrant camp. Right, said Buck, trying to breathe through his mouth. How many more do we need? Running Cloud consulted the dirt map. To cover the likely retreat paths and account for missed shots, at least 15. 15! Several voices exclaimed at once. Would you prefer the star scorpions continue their jerky harvest? Running Cloud asked mildly. Nobody had a good argument against that, though several people had to step away to clear their watering eyes. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The skunk hunting teams got more efficient with practice, though by sundown everyone agreed they never wanted to get that efficient at anything ever again. One-Eyed Pete's catapult went through several test launches using hay bales as stand-ins for their actual ammunition, though the final test was delayed when Jim Bob insisted on trying to launch himself. "I could drop tobacco on them from above," he argued as Buck and Kid Thompson dragged him away from the catapult. "Like a spiritual peace offering." "The only spirit you're full of is the moonshine kind," Buck muttered. As evening approached, Running Cloud gathered everyone for a final planning session. The Apache warriors had been observing the space pions' patterns all day, building a detailed picture of their habits and vulnerabilities. "They are most active during the hottest part of the day," Running Cloud explained, "but this is also when they are most vulnerable. Their metal skins release steam when they overheat. They must return to their ship at sunset to unload their cargo. And that's when their force field is weakest," Young Hawk added. "They cannot maintain it fully while the ship's door is open." The final plan took shape. They would strike at high noon the next day, when the space pions would be most active but also most susceptible to overheating. The Apache warriors would position mirrors to reflect sunlight at strategic points, disorienting the aliens and herding them into predetermined paths. Meanwhile, the Cowboys would manage the skunkapult, as Jim Bob had insisted on calling it, the one contribution of his that everyone had actually accepted. "Remember," Buck instructed his deputies, "we're not aiming to hurt them. Just convince them that our beef ain't worth the trouble." "And if that doesn't work," Jim Bob piped up, "I've got my special blend ready." "Jim Bob," everyone said in unison, "N.O." As the group broke up to get what rest they could before the next day's battle, Buck found himself standing with Running Cloud, watching the green lights of alien activity flicker over their town. "You know," Buck said, "win or lose, people ain't never going to believe this story." Running Cloud smiled. "Then we must make sure to succeed so spectacularly that they have no choice but to believe it." He paused, then added, "Though perhaps we should agree to leave the part about Jim Bob's tobacco experiments out of the official record." "Agreed," Buck said. "Some things are too unbelievable even for a tale about space scorpions." As if to punctuate their words, a distant cry of, "But what if we dip the tobacco in honey first?" drifted across the camp, followed by multiple voices shouting "N.O." in 2 different languages. Buck adjusted his hat and tried not to think too hard about what the next day would bring. They had their plan, they had their weapons, and they had enough concentrated skunk essence to make a vulture's eyes water. Either they were about to save the territory, or they were about to make the kind of mistake that people would be laughing about for generations to come. Knowing their luck, probably both.